The Cleveland Browns just made one of the most dramatic decisions in recent NFL history, and it has absolutely nothing to do with a minor roster adjustment or a quiet depth chart shuffle. They didn't replace one underperforming lineman. They didn't rotate 2 starters out for fresher options. They replaced all 5 offensive line starters in a single sweeping move that sent shockwaves through every front office, every locker room, and every film room across the league. That almost never happens in the modern NFL. Offensive line continuity is considered sacred in professional football. Teams invest years, sometimes the better part of a decade, building the chemistry, timing, and communication required to function as a cohesive unit across that front 5. And this time, every single one of those starters was gone. When a franchise makes that kind of nuclear decision, there is only one conclusion any serious football analyst can draw: something was very, very wrong. At first, the mainstream conversation centered on performance. Protection breakdowns, missed assignments, inconsistency in blocking schemes, those were the talking points dominating the headlines in the days immediately following the announcement. But as the dust began to settle and analysts started pulling deeper layers off this story, another narrative gained significant traction, one that placed Shedeur Sanders directly at the center of a much more troubling picture. The question being asked across football circles was not simply whether the offensive line had failed. The question was whether Shedeur Sanders had been quietly set up to fail from the very beginning of his tenure with the Browns. Go back and watch the tape, because the film never lies. Pull up any game from Shedeur's early stretch with Cleveland and study what is actually happening in real time behind the line of scrimmage. 3rd and long situations where the pocket collapsed within seconds of the snap. Edge rushers arriving completely untouched, with no blocker between them and the quarterback. Interior pressure splitting double teams as if those blockers weren't even occupying space on the field. Communication breakdowns happening pre-snap that left gaps wide open before the ball was even in Sanders' hands. Yet despite all of that structural chaos happening around him, Shedeur Sanders was still delivering throws into tight windows. He stepped up in a collapsing pocket, slid left, reset his feet, and fired accurate passes. These were not routine completions made comfortable by clean protection. These were throws that the majority of starting quarterbacks in the NFL would not even attempt under those conditions. Week after week, the same pattern repeated itself: immediate pressure, free rushes, missed assignments, and a quarterback still managing to flash elite-level traits in the middle of it all. At some point, coincidence transforms into a pattern. And when 5 linemen are removed from the roster simultaneously, that pattern becomes impossible to dismiss. Now it is time to address the layer of this story that many outlets have been reluctant to discuss directly: the coaching environment surrounding Shedeur Sanders during this period. Head coach Kevin Stefanski had already been the subject of reported tension in connection with Sanders' development. There were reports about the limiting of Shedeur's practice representatives. There was public praise directed consistently toward other players while Sanders' contributions were downplayed. There were visible attempts to shift the spotlight and manage the narrative around the young quarterback in ways that raised eyebrows among those paying close attention. No one used the word sabotage openly at the time. But controlling the environment around a quarterback is one of the oldest and most effective tools in football politics. If protection collapses consistently, the quarterback's statistics suffer. If the statistics suffer, public critics begin pointing fingers at the signal caller. If enough fingers are pointed, leadership suddenly has the justification it needs to make a change at the position. That is the formula, and it has played out in professional football before. But here is where the situation with Shedeur Sanders took a different turn entirely. Instead of collapsing under the weight of a broken environment, Sanders kept flashing the very traits that made him a coveted prospect in the first place: red zone precision, third down composure, and pocket awareness that bordered on extraordinary given the circumstances. Rather than disappearing under pressure, he elevated his game. And that made the situation around him even louder and harder to contain. Surface-level statistics rarely tell the complete truth in professional football, and this situation is a clear example of that reality. Sacks appear in box scores. Pressure rates, time to collapse numbers, and pre-snap communication breakdowns do not always make the highlight packages or the morning sports radio discussions. Casual fans watching the Browns during this stretch saw stalled drives, poor offensive output, and a struggling unit that seemed unable to sustain momentum. But deeper film analysis told an entirely different story. Pressure was arriving in under 2 seconds from the snap on a consistent basis. Defensive rushers were reaching the quarterback untouched with regularity. Route timing, which is entirely dependent on the quarterback having even a brief moment to set his feet and go through his progressions, was being completely disrupted by the instant collapse of protection around Sanders. Pass protection slides were breaking down before the play even developed. That is not quarterback hesitation. That is not poor decision-making. That is structural failure at the most fundamental level of offensive football. And when structural failure is severe enough and consistent enough to result in 5 starting offensive linemen being dismissed from a roster simultaneously, it reframes absolutely everything that happened on the field during that period. Replacing an entire offensive line is not simply a performance-based decision, it carries enormous cultural weight within an NFL organization. A move of this magnitude is a declaration. It is a franchise telling everyone inside and outside the building exactly where its priorities lie and who it is building around. Franchises in the NFL do not rebuild their trenches at this scale unless they have made a full, unambiguous commitment to the signal caller behind center. That kind of commitment sends a message that reverberates through the entire roster, the coaching staff, and the broader league. The Cleveland Browns are no longer experimenting with Shedeur Sanders. They are building around him, and the complete overhaul of their offensive line is the most concrete evidence of that commitment the organization could possibly provide. With multiple draft picks in hand and genuine roster flexibility available to them, every personnel decision the Browns make from this point forward now flows through a single strategic lens. Does this help the quarterback? Not best player available in the abstract sense. Not positional value on a generic depth chart. The question being asked in the Cleveland front office is whether each acquisition stabilizes protection, amplifies offensive chemistry, or eliminates friction from Shedeur Sanders' environment. After a complete line reset of this scale, there is no gray area remaining in the organization's approach. Every draft pick and every free agency signing represents either reinforcement of the direction they have chosen or a step backward from it. The skill position picture around Shedeur Sanders matters just as much as the trench decisions, because chemistry between a quarterback and his receivers is not something that can be manufactured overnight. Timing, trust, route depth, and the ability to adjust on the fly during broken plays, these elements take repetitions and genuine connection to develop. Not every receiver currently on the Browns roster demonstrated that level of synchronization during Shedeur's early stretch with the team. Some routes lacked the sharpness and urgency required to create clean throwing windows. Some timing moments between the quarterback and his targets felt genuinely off. But one name has emerged from that group as a player growing into clear alignment with Sanders: wide receiver Isaiah Bond. Sharp route running, game-breaking speed, visible hunger, and an increasingly apparent connection with the quarterback represent exactly the kind of complementary profile the Browns need around their signal caller. Receivers who make life easier for the quarterback stay. Those who do not become serious questions that the front office will need to answer. The broader NFL history on this subject is worth examining because it provides essential context for what happened in Cleveland. Certain quarterbacks in the modern era have received extended patience from their organizations during developmental struggles, protection, time, and consistent support even through difficult early stretches. Others have faced immediate pressure, reduced opportunities, and environments that made development unnecessarily difficult. That is not a conspiracy theory, it is a documented pattern of how professional football organizations operate. Development environments matter enormously for young quarterbacks, and the difference between a quarterback succeeding and failing at the professional level is often less about raw talent and more about the quality of the environment built around him. When a young quarterback performs under genuine chaos and still flashes the traits of a future starter, organizations face a critical choice: protect him and build correctly, or continue complicating his environment until the situation becomes untenable. The Cleveland Browns have now made their choice clear, and they made it in the most unambiguous way available to them. Here is the part of this story that should genuinely concern the rest of the NFL. If Shedeur Sanders produced the flashes he produced while operating behind a broken offensive line, under reported tension with his coaching staff, and without full receiver synchronization, what happens when those variables are removed? What does Shedeur Sanders look like with a functional pocket, with protection that actually gives him time to work through his progressions, with receivers running sharp routes on time, and with a coaching environment that is genuinely aligned behind his development? Third and long situations without panic. Pockets that actually form and hold. Timing routes hitting on schedule. Momentum in an offense changes rapidly when the chaos surrounding a quarterback is replaced with structure. The league has seen glimpses of what Shedeur Sanders can do under the worst possible conditions. Nobody outside of Cleveland should be particularly comfortable thinking about what comes next. This is no longer a story about a young quarterback trying to prove he belongs at the professional level. This has become a story about leadership alignment within an NFL organization and the dramatic steps that organization took to correct a broken situation. Quarterbacks of Shedeur Sanders' caliber do not adjust themselves to broken systems. Functional organizations adjust their systems to the quarterback. The Cleveland Browns' decision to remove all 5 offensive line starters in a single move signals a fundamental organizational understanding of that principle. Whatever environment existed around Sanders during that difficult early stretch, whether it was the result of intentional decisions, systemic failures, or a combination of both, is now closed. The focus within the Cleveland organization is now unified and purpose-driven in a way it clearly was not before. When you fire 5 offensive linemen simultaneously in the NFL, you are not simply addressing a blocking problem. You are making a statement about the direction of the entire franchise. You are declaring publicly and internally that the quarterback behind center is the priority, that his protection is the priority, and that the broken environment that existed previously will not be tolerated going forward. That statement now belongs to Shedeur Sanders, and the entire league is watching to see what he does with it. There are no more structural excuses available. If protection stabilizes, chemistry builds across the offense, and Sanders receives the clean environment that he was clearly denied during that early stretch, the production that follows will speak for itself. And when that production arrives, the narratives about doubt and failure and a broken start will disappear entirely. If you believe this story deserves the attention it is getting, if you think the evidence around what Shedeur Sanders was actually dealing with during that stretch changes how this situation should be evaluated, then hit that like button right now and make sure you are subscribed to this channel. We bring you the deep film analysis, the behind-the-scenes reporting, and the real football conversations that the mainstream coverage consistently misses. This story is absolutely not finished, and you are not going to want to miss what comes next.